In the pale light of an early spring morning, the Harrow estate lay draped in quiet melancholy. The dew clung to the hedges and rose-bushes like fragile jewels, yet the grand house seemed dull, its windows reflecting only a muted sky, as though mourning the presence it had lost. Evelyn Harrow moved along the corridor in silence, her skirts brushing the polished wooden floors, each footfall a reminder of the servitude that now defined her existence. The halls, once alive with her father's laughter and the gentle music of evening pianoforte, now echoed with her steps and the cold whispers of a house that no longer claimed her. Her reflection in the tall mirrors, a pale, delicate face framed by dark, untamed hair, was the image of quiet endurance, a woman taught to shrink beneath the weight of a world that denied her worth. Clarina, her stepsister, glided through the same halls and silks of deep crimson and gold, the morning sunlight catching on her rings and delicate lace collars, each detail a testament to ambition honed with precision. Her eyes, sharp and assessing, rested on Evelyn with a mixture of disdain and ownership. "Do see that you do not misplace my gloves, Evelyn," she said lightly, though every syllable carried the authority of a monarch. "The Marchioness expects us to present ourselves with utmost decorum. I would hate to think the Harrow household is represented by slovenly carelessness." Evelyn bowed her head, cheeks flushing, and whispered in obedient, "Yes, Clarina," though the word felt hollow on her tongue. Her fingers trembled as they smoothed the folds of her stepsister's gown, a gesture of service she had performed countless times, yet never without the sharp sting of humiliation. Outside, the carriage awaited, its polished black body gleaming despite the faint morning mist. Horses pawed the cobbled courtyard impatiently, their breath curling in the cool air. Evelyn helped Clarina descend, holding the skirts and ensuring the steps were graceful. The attendants whispered about the young woman who had once been the pride of the Harrow estate, now reduced to invisible labor beneath the shadow of her stepmother's ambitions. Clarina's eyes darted to Evelyn's face, narrowing with a subtle cruelty that she believed to be perfectly veiled. "Do not trip," she said, her voice almost sweet, yet the edge beneath it cut deep. "I would hate for the Duke, or anyone of note, to remember your clumsiness more than my elegance." Evelyn's lips pressed together. She swallowed the ache that rose like a bitter tide, forcing her posture into the rigid grace demanded by circumstance. The journey to London was a muted procession of rattling wheels and whispered judgments. Evelyn's gaze lingered on the passing countryside, a tapestry of budding trees, smoke curling from distant chimneys, and the pale glint of rivers winding through the earth. She imagined her father walking these grounds, voice gentle yet firm, reminding her that dignity lay not in wealth or attention, but in the quiet constancy of the heart. The memory was both balm and torment, a reminder of the family she had lost and the cruel hierarchy that had replaced it. Clarina, wrapped in layers of satin and self-assurance, spoke intermittently to the footman, offering imperious instructions that painted Evelyn's role in stark relief. Always the assistant, never the participant, always present but unseen. Upon their arrival in London, the city's hum enveloped them. Carriages clattered over cobblestones, vendors called their wares, and the early light glinted off stone facades worn by time and prestige. The Marchioness of Wetherby's home, a stately townhouse adorned with freshly polished brass and flowering urns, awaited with the promise of society scrutiny. Evelyn followed behind, eyes lowered, bearing Clarina's shawl and gloves with careful attention, acutely aware of the eyes that flickered toward her, some curious, some dismissive, some mercilessly amused. Every whisper seemed a blade. "The forgotten Harrow girl," one lady murmured. "How kind of her family to allow her presence." Another laughed softly, the sound curling around Evelyn like smoke. She held her breath and stepped lightly, each movement measured to avoid drawing attention that might invite ridicule or derision. And then, amidst the clinking of teacups and the murmur of polite conversation, he entered. The Duke of Ashbourne, tall and commanding, moved with an air of effortless authority that drew glances as naturally as sunlight follows the dawn. Evelyn, standing near the garden doors with her hands clasped over the delicate shawl she carried, caught sight of him and felt an almost imperceptible pull within her chest. He paused mid-step, scanning the room, and for a fleeting moment, their eyes met. There was no recognition in the grand, ceremonial sense, yet in the briefness of that gaze, Evelyn felt herself truly seen for the first time in years, not as a shadow, not as a servant, not as an inconvenience, but as a person, fragile and steadfast. The heartbeat in her throat quickened, and for a breathless instant, she imagined courage she had never dared claim. Clarina intercepted him immediately, offering a dazzling smile and a calculated curtsy that spoke of preparation and intent. Evelyn's hand shook subtly, the shawl slipping slightly, and she bent to recover it with the quiet precision of a lifetime spent in unseen service. The Duke's gaze lingered, almost imperceptibly, as though drawn to the soft dignity in Evelyn's posture. He turned away politely, yet his eyes returned again and again, scanning for the quiet figure who seemed somehow out of place, yet perfectly defined against the opulent backdrop of the room. Clarina's words flowed over the moment like a dam of cold water, attempting to redirect attention, but a whisper of something unspoken, an acknowledgment of Evelyn's subtle grace, passed between the two, delicate as the brush of silk against skin, fleeting yet indelible. The afternoon waned, and the gathering slowly dissolved into smaller clusters of conversation. Evelyn remained by the garden doors, half hidden, letting the sunlight warm her face, as though the world could offer brief reprieve from relentless scrutiny. She adjusted the shawl, each fold a measured act of composure, though her heart still fluttered with the memory of the Duke's gaze. The voices, the laughter, the clinking of porcelain, all blended into a distant hum. A servant's glance toward her carried both pity and apology, and she nodded imperceptibly, acknowledging the shared understanding of a girl relegated to the margins of opulence. And then, before Evelyn could retreat further into her quietude, a hush fell over the gathering. The Duke of Ashbourne, speaking with measured grace, addressed the Marchioness directly, his eyes never leaving Evelyn for more than a heartbeat. "Might I inquire the name of the young lady standing so still, yet with an air that commands notice?" His voice, calm yet insistent, rippled across the room, carrying a weight that caused murmurs to flutter like startled birds. Clarina's lips parted in surprise, color rising to her cheeks, while Evelyn felt an electric mixture of fear and astonishment. All eyes turned, and in that instant, the delicate balance of her existence, the invisible, obedient life she had endured, shifted imperceptibly, like the first tremor before a storm. Evelyn's hands tightened around the shawl. She swallowed hard, cheeks flushed with a combination of shame and a dawning, tentative hope. Could the world see her? Could this man admired, untouchable, a figure of power and grace, truly perceive her beyond the service she rendered, beyond the cruelty imposed upon her? She dared not meet his eyes again, yet she felt the intensity of his gaze, patient and deliberate, searching for something that society had told her she lacked. The room, ornate and perfumed, seemed suddenly vast, filled with the possibility of recognition and the unspoken promise of change. And so, as Evelyn remained by the garden doors, heart trembling between dread and yearning, the Duke of Ashbourne's eyes lingered once more. For the first time in her young life, she felt that the whispers of invisibility might no longer define her. And yet, just as quickly as the moment arrived, Clarina's sharp voice intervened, directing attention elsewhere, and the delicate, trembling hope within Evelyn was forced to retreat. Still, the gaze remained, an unbroken thread linking her to a world she had believed forever beyond reach, a world in which a simple acknowledgment from the most desired duke might one day speak louder than a lifetime of cruelty. The spring air in London carried a heady mixture of newly bloomed flowers, coal smoke from distant chimneys, and the faint, lingering scent of polished wood and waxed floors that marked the residences of the city's elite. Evelyn Harrow moved through the crowded streets with careful precision, her hands occupied with the gloves, fans, and wraps her stepsister demanded she bear. Though her heart beat with a quiet tension, she kept her gaze low, aware that every noble eye was trained on the women of the Harrow household, yet none were meant to linger on her. Even in a city alive with music, laughter, and the hum of ambition, Evelyn felt the cold familiarity of invisibility pressing around her shoulders, a weight she bore daily. Clarina strode ahead, her posture perfect, her every gesture calculated, a radiant display of grace designed to attract attention and secure the admiration of England's most influential circles. The first gathering of the season had been arranged in a sunlit conservatory, a space filled with exotic blooms and crystal vases that caught the light in fragmented rainbows. Gentlemen and ladies milled about in silk and satin, the murmur of conversation punctuated by laughter like the distant chime of bells. Evelyn, tasked with assisting Clarina, positioned herself near a display of orchids, holding a rose that had slipped from the hands of a careless debutante. Her fingers trembled slightly, though she did not allow it to show, and her heart caught when she saw him. The Duke of Ashbourne, resplendent in dark attire that accentuated the breadth of his shoulders and the quiet power of his bearing, passed slowly through the room. His eyes, sharp yet discerning, swept across the guests, and for a brief, imperceptible moment, they rested on her. A faint flush crept across her cheeks, though she dared not meet him fully, and she returned to her task with trembling hands, hiding the sudden warmth that his attention ignited in her chest. The Duke lingered longer than necessary, his curiosity clearly piqued. He approached the Marchioness and, with a voice measured yet imbued with authority, inquired after the young woman by the orchids. "And pray, who is the lady in quiet contemplation by the blooms? She carries herself with an ease not learned in drawing-rooms alone." The Marchioness, adjusting a pearl necklace with trembling fingers, answered softly, her voice betraying both surprise and uncertainty. "She is Miss Evelyn Harrow, or, at least, so her household claims. I had not expected she would attend." The Duke's lips curved in a faint, knowing smile. That subtle recognition, though veiled in courtesy, seemed to chase the shadows that had long clung to Evelyn, though she remained oblivious, focused only on ensuring that Clarina's train did not catch in a chair leg. Later, in a secluded alcove of the conservatory, a minor accident presented the opportunity for a gesture that would alter the course of their acquaintance. A rose slipped from Evelyn's grasp, tumbling to the floor, where a gentleman's foot threatened to crush it. The Duke, passing near, bent gracefully, retrieving the flower with a careful hand and holding it out to her. "It is far too lovely to be left unattended," he said, his tone carrying neither mockery nor condescension, only genuine regard. Evelyn's breath caught, and her fingers brushed his as she accepted the bloom. Clarina's presence loomed, yet she seemed unaware of the small, daring interaction. The room held its rhythm, oblivious to the momentary defiance of societal expectation. Evelyn, though overwhelmed, felt the tiniest spark of something she had never experienced: acknowledgement, a recognition of her existence as something beyond service and shadow. Whispers began to circulate, tentative at first, like a breeze stirring the delicate curtains of the conservatory. "Did you notice the Duke?" His gaze lingered longer than propriety permits. Another voice replied, faintly, "The Harrow girl? Surely you jest. He would never look upon someone so ordinary." Evelyn, adjusting her shawl, caught only fragments, yet each word seared her with equal parts shame and incredulous hope. Clarina, sensing the murmured attention, grew alert. Her eyes, sharp and imperious, followed the Duke's movements with the possessiveness of a predator protecting her claim. Evelyn could feel the tension between duty and desire, between expectation and the faint possibility of something forbidden. She bowed her head once more, hiding her eyes, though she could not suppress the quickened pulse that accompanied every glance he cast her way. As the afternoon advanced, a charity auction offered another stage for subtle rebellion. Evelyn, stationed near a set of artfully arranged silks, adjusted Clarina's wrap while the bidders circled, the chandeliers above casting fractured light across the polished floors. The Duke approached, his voice low, resonant, and meant only for her ears. "Miss Harrow, why do you remain at the edge of every gathering, as though the world itself fears your presence?" Evelyn's fingers tightened around the fabric in her hands, and she lowered her gaze further. "I am but of service," she murmured, a truth layered with resignation. The Duke's eyes softened, yet there was a firmness beneath that softened gaze. "Service does not define the soul," he said quietly, offering no judgment, only acknowledgement. The words, light as a whisper yet heavy with significance, unsettled her more profoundly than any insult or reprimand she had endured. Clarina's intervention was swift, her laughter bright and calculated as she guided Evelyn away with a sharp grip on her elbow. "Do be careful," she said, with mock sweetness. "The Duke may be a gentleman, but one cannot allow imagination to interfere with reality." Evelyn, her heart still echoing with the Duke's words, obeyed without a sound, yet inwardly, a fragile sense of defiance began to stir. She wondered if she could exist beyond the dictates of her stepsister's ambition, if the small, fleeting recognition could bloom into something tangible, something the world could not ignore. Even in the shadow of Clarina's control, the idea took root. Perhaps her worth was not to be measured by the harshest eyes in the room. By evening, as lanterns were lit and the conservatory dimmed into a softer glow, the Duke found a way to communicate in a manner both discreet and daring. Through a trusted footman, he delivered a sealed note to Evelyn, the paper delicate, scented with a faint hint of lavender. Her hand shook as she unfolded it, the words elegantly penned, simple yet revolutionary in their implication. "You deserve to be seen." The message, unsigned but unmistakable in its intention, ignited a mixture of fear and elation within her. Clarina, ever watchful, intercepted the note before she could savor it fully. Yet the Duke, observing the exchange from a distance, understood that acknowledgment alone might not suffice. Some truths required courage to protect. Some connections demanded defiance of convention. As Evelyn retreated to a quiet corridor at the edge of the gathering, clutching her shawl and the echo of a sentiment she had scarcely dared imagine, she allowed herself a moment of reflection. The world outside the windows, London's pale twilight, and the early blooms of spring, seemed to mirror the fragile hope now taking root in her chest. She realized that the season, with all its grandeur, whispers, and veiled intrigues, might not only measure her worth by the judgment of others, but also reveal the possibility of being truly seen, of existing beyond the shadow of cruelty and neglect. And so, as the soft glow of lanterns faded into the encroaching dusk, Evelyn stood by the conservatory doors, heart trembling between apprehension and a daring, silent optimism. Somewhere in the crowd, the Duke's gaze remained fixed upon her, deliberate and patient, like a promise too restrained to be spoken aloud, yet too urgent to be ignored. The whisper of recognition lingered, fragile yet undeniable, as the city's hum continued beyond the walls, leaving her poised on the precipice of an uncertain but thrilling awakening. For the first time in many years, the girl who had believed herself invisible felt the possibility that someone extraordinary, might insist upon her existence. And in that quiet, stolen moment, she knew the coming days would test not only her courage, but the fragile hope that had begun to bloom within her heart. The night of the spring ball arrived with a hush of anticipation that swept through London like a silken breeze. Lanterns glimmered along the streets, reflecting in the rain-slicked cobblestones, while carriages bearing noble families rattled over the pavement, announcing arrivals with polished wheels and the low murmur of hooves. Inside Carlton House, chandeliers blazed with hundreds of candles, casting fractured pools of gold across velvet-draped walls and marble floors. The scent of blooming hyacinths mingled with polished wood and the faint musk of perfume, creating a heady atmosphere that both exhilarated and intimidated. Evelyn Harrow moved among the staff, carrying Clarina's wraps with careful precision, each step measured, each breath controlled. Her heart fluttered beneath the confines of her modest gown, a soft cream silk that seemed almost invisible amidst the parade of satin, jewels, and lace that crowded the room. Every whispered word of admiration for Clarina, every polite nod and curtsy from the assembled guests, pressed on her like the weight of invisible chains. From across the ballroom, the Duke of Ashbourne entered, his presence commanding attention without effort. Dark eyes scanned the crowd, moving past polished debutantes and gilded socialites, until they rested briefly, deliberately, on Evelyn. She dared not meet his gaze fully, lowering her eyes to the floor, as if her very posture could conceal her existence. The Duke, however, approached with the calm assurance of a man accustomed to the scrutiny of both crown and society, his boots echoing softly against the marble. Clarina, radiant and intent on securing his admiration, intercepted him with a calculated curtsy, laughter lightly spilling from her lips. But the Duke's attention faltered. His eyes found Evelyn once more, and in that fleeting connection, a quiet rebellion sparked, an acknowledgment that defied every expectation. The music swelled, and dancers twirled across the polished floor in patterns precise and practiced. The Duke moved past the throng, extending his hand with an ease that betrayed confidence and intent. "May I have this dance?" he asked, his voice low yet carrying across the murmured conversations. Evelyn hesitated, aware of the eyes upon them, the scandal that might ripple through the ballroom should she accept. She opened her lips, faltered, and then, with a courage born of long-suppressed longing, placed her hand in his. The Duke guided her with gentle assurance, the motion both protective and commanding, as if the world beyond their immediate space ceased to exist. Gasps and murmurs followed them, subtle yet undeniable, but Evelyn felt only the warmth of his steady presence, the quiet gravity of a man who saw her as something beyond circumstance. After the dance, they slipped into a lantern-lit gallery, away from the prying eyes of the assembly. Mirrors along the walls reflected fractured images of chandeliers and gowns, capturing the moment in 1,000 golden shards. The Duke's gaze was steady, searching. "Who taught you that your presence is of so little consequence?" he asked, his tone gentle yet edged with unspoken authority. Evelyn lowered her gaze, a tremor passing through her frame. I have been told it all my life," she murmured, voice quivering beneath the weight of old shame. "That I am nothing, that I am here only in service to others, that my existence is a shadow beside my stepmother's and sister's ambitions." Her words fell into the quiet, carried only by the faint rustle of silk and the soft patter of distant rain against the windows. He stepped closer, the warmth of his figure a balm to her long-endured isolation. "Cruelty is rarely truth," he said, his voice low, deliberate, and rich with conviction. "It is a measure of those who impose it, not of those who endure it. You are not nothing, Evelyn. Never nothing." The syllables, carefully chosen, reverberated in her chest. A mixture of astonishment, relief, and cautious hope welled within her, threatening to spill into tears. She dared not look fully into his eyes, fearing that to meet such intent directly would shatter the fragile composure she had maintained for so long. Yet in that moment, she understood that she had been seen, not for her station, not for her obedience, but for the quiet dignity that had always belonged to her, unrecognized though it had been. Clarina's interruption came abruptly, her sharp voice slicing through the gallery's intimacy. "Evelyn, do not forget your place," she commanded, color rising in her cheeks as she gestured to the approaching guests. The Duke would hardly wish to be delayed by. Her words faltered as the Duke's gaze, firm and unwavering, turned fully toward her. "I decide whom I regard, Clarina," he said, his tone calm yet resolute, carrying the authority of lineage and the certainty of personal choice. The silence that followed was almost physical, a vacuum of sound in which every guest's attention sharpened. Clarina's composure faltered. Whispers began to circulate once more, hinting at scandal and defiance. Yet Evelyn felt only the solidity of the Duke's assurance surrounding her. Outside, the rain had begun to fall softly, each droplet catching the lantern light, creating a delicate cascade of glimmering points. The Duke led Evelyn to the gardens, the air cool and fragrant with wet blossoms. She shivered slightly, and he draped his coat over her shoulders, the gesture unspoken but intimate. "You have borne more than your share of cruelty," he said, voice barely above the whisper of rain. "And yet here you are, graceful and unwavering, though the world has denied you acknowledgement. That ends tonight." Evelyn felt a swell of emotion that threatened to overcome her. Years of invisibility and doubt pressed against the sudden affirmation of worth. They walked slowly among the hedges, each step deliberate, each glance an unspoken conversation. Evelyn's mind raced, attempting to reconcile the life she had been forced to accept with the possibility now presented, an acknowledgement not of charity, but of genuine desire and respect. "I have never believed myself worthy of such attention," she confessed, voice low, fragile. "All my life, I have been reminded that I am nothing, that my presence is tolerated at best." The Duke lifted her hand gently, placing a tender kiss upon it, a gesture both ceremonial and profoundly personal. "Then allow me to rewrite the story of your life," he said softly, the words carrying weight that transcended ceremony. "Allow me to ensure you are seen, cherished, and never again made to feel small." A distant flash of lightning illuminated the garden briefly, the sky darkening with the promise of a storm. Yet in that brief moment, Evelyn's fear did not return. The storm outside was powerless against the quiet certainty of his presence, the tangible proof that recognition and affection could exist beyond societal decree. "You are my heartbeat," he murmured, words simple yet monumental, the declaration carrying the force of all the suppressed longing and courage within her. The phrase, repeated only once, anchored itself in her chest, a counterpoint to years of cruelty and neglect. The world seemed to tilt, a delicate balance, shifting toward the improbable yet undeniable. The Duke's hand remained lightly upon hers, guiding without coercion, a steady presence in a life that had long been dictated by others. The faint murmur of the ballroom and the soft patter of rain merged into a singular rhythm, underscoring the moment of transformation. Evelyn felt the weight of shame and invisibility lift fractionally, replaced by a fragile yet resolute hope that the life she had endured might finally yield to possibility. In the shadows of the hedges, beneath the glimmer of lanterns and the silver gleam of rain-soaked leaves, she dared to imagine a future defined not by cruelty or circumstance, but by recognition, care, and the deliberate choice of one man who had seen her. And as the rain continued to fall softly around them, the Duke's eyes never wavered, holding hers with an intensity that promised constancy. Evelyn felt her heartbeat synchronize, a quiet affirmation that the words spoken were no mere formality, but the beginning of a life where worth was acknowledged and devotion freely given. Yet even in that rare, luminous moment, a shadow of doubt lingered. Could society, Clarina, and the rigid expectations of lineage and title allow such a union to flourish? The question hung delicately in the humid evening air, unanswered, a silent tension that ensured the story was only beginning. The threads of courage, desire, and defiance now intertwined as tightly as the hands that held her in the rain.